The date is July 13th, 2019. On this day, my dad, brother, and I were in the city of Bloomington, Illinois, at the Washington Street Railroad crossing. Here is where the Union Pacific's Springfield Sub and the Joliet Sub meet and cross over Norfolk Southern's Bloomington District. We were here because I saw on the Amtrak tracker that Amtrak's Lincoln service was about to come by here after making its Bloomington stop. The reason why we were out here in Bloomington was because we were on a road trip. As part of it, the first part involved getting to Omaha, Nebraska. You'll see why we were going there at the end of the video, but until then, we saw quite a few other trains along the way. After seeing the Lincoln service here, we then drove to Chillicothe, Illinois. Here, I was hoping to see one of Bnsf's trains as it either passed the station in town or climbed Edelstein Hill west of town on the old Santa Fe main line. Unfortunately, when we got to town, there were no trains on the main line either coming or going. So we decided to follow the main line westward until we found one. When we reached Edelstein, Illinois, that's where we saw our first train on the old Santa Fe main line. It was an eastbound Bnsf intermodal train, led by 5 GE locomotives, the second one wearing the old war bonnet paint scheme, but with the Bnsf lettering on it. We are at the North Centerville Road crossing, east of Edelstein, Illinois. Bnsf 6974, 7050, and 6502 are GE ES44 C4s. Bnsf 4712 and 5333 are both GE C44-9Ws, 4712 being built in 1997 and 5333 being built in 2001. The reason why 4712 has the old war bonnet paint scheme on it was because it was part of an unfinished order of locomotives commissioned by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway. As a result of the Bnsf merger, when these engines were finished, they were given the Bnsf lettering instead of the Santa Fe lettering, resulting in what people call the fake bonnets. Either way, it was still great to see a good old war bonnet on the Santa Fe mainline, even if the engine was a little late to getting to its railroad. Just to add in, we are on Bnsf's Chillicothe subdivision, which is a part of the famed Southern Transcon, which is Bnsf's main line from Los Angeles, California to Chicago, Illinois. After seeing the intermodal train here, we then continued westward along the old Santa Fe main line. As we did, we then came across a westbound Bnsf intermodal train. We managed to get ahead of it and caught it at the Road 22,000 East/Road 28 railroad crossing in Williamsfield, Illinois. Once the front of the train got by us, we then gave chase to it again. We soon arrived in Galesburg, Illinois, one of the most famous railfanning hotspots in the United States. We drove to Peak Park, where Bnsf's Chillicothe sub goes under the Mendota and Barstow subdivisions. Once parked, we then watched as our Bnsf intermodal train we saw in Williamsfield came by on the Chillicothe subdivision. Galesburg, Illinois is a big railroad town. It was once home to two railroads, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, which operated the Chillicothe sub, and the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad, also known as the Burlington Route, which ran all the other railroad lines in and out of town. The CB&Q later became part of the Burlington Northern Railroad, and in 1996, the BN and the Santa Fe became the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway, putting all the lines in Galesburg under one railroad. BNSF operates 6 lines in and out of Galesburg. The Chillicothe sub, running through town between Chicago, Illinois and Fort Madison, Iowa. The Mendota sub, running northeast from here to Aurora, Illinois and ultimately Chicago. The Barstow sub, running north from here to Savannah, Illinois, and ultimately the Twin Cities. The Ottumwa sub, running west from here to Creston, Iowa, and ultimately Omaha, Nebraska. The Brookfield sub, running south from here to Kansas City, Missouri. And the Peoria sub, which is more of a branch line, running southeast from here to Peoria, Illinois. BNSF also has its Galesburg Terminal Yard, which is a massive classification yard and locomotive servicing facility just south of town on the old Burlington lines. After this intermodal train came by, we then saw an eastbound BNSF intermodal train come by on the Chillicothe sub. Although BNSF owns all the lines in Galesburg, Amtrak also runs its trains through town on the Mendota, the Ottumwa, the Brookfield, and the Chillicothe subdivisions. Although Amtrak only uses the Chillicothe subdivision west of town. Amtrak operates the California Zephyr, the Southwest Chief, the Illinois Zephyr, and the Carl Sandburg through town. Union Pacific also has trackage rights on BNSF, utilizing the Chillicothe and Mendota subdivisions. And to add on top of all that, Genesee and Wyoming's Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railroad also uses trackage rights on BNSF's Peoria subdivision to interchange with BNSF at their Galesburg Terminal Yard. If this town doesn't count as a hotspot, I don't know what is. As the BNSF intermodal train continued to roll on by, we then saw BNSF 1825 as it was shunting a train on the Mendota subdivision on the upper track. Bnsf 1825 is a rebuilt EMD SD39-2. It was originally built in 1977 as an SD40-2 for the Santa Fe Railway as 5057. When the Bnsf merger happened, it was renumbered to 6716. Galesburg's Peak Park is a small metro park located just northeast of downtown Galesburg, and although is not considered a railfanning park, it does make for a great place to watch Bnsf trains on both the old Santa Fe Railway and the old Burlington route, as both lines are very busy, especially the old Santa Fe. The bridge that carries the old Burlington route across the old Santa Fe is especially photogenic. You can pretty much see all the train traffic through Galesburg from this one little park. The only thing you wouldn't see is the Toledo-Peoria and Western Railroad, as they use the Peoria district to get into town. If you want to come here and see trains come by this park, the park entrance is located on East North Street. The entrance is on the west side of the railway bridge that carries the tracks across East North Street. After 1825 got back to the yard, we then caught another eastbound Bnsf intermodal train on the Chillicothe subdivision. It was being led by 3 GE locomotives and 1 EMD locomotive. As this Bnsf train goes by us, let's talk about the Amtrak trains that go through Galesburg. The California Zephyr operates from Chicago, Illinois to Emeryville, California, in the Bay Area, utilizing Bnsf's Mendota and Ottumwa subdivisions. The Illinois Zephyr and the Carl Sandburg operate from Chicago to Quincy, Illinois, utilizing Bnsf's Mendota and Brookfield subdivisions. The Southwest Chief runs from Chicago, Illinois to Los Angeles, California, utilizing Bnsf's Mendota and Chillicothe subdivisions. Back in the good old days of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, Amtrak's Southwest Chief used to utilize the entire Chillicothe subdivision to Chicago, and even had its own passenger station on the Santa Fe line here in Galesburg. But once the Bnsf merger happened, the Southwest Chief between Galesburg, Illinois and Chicago was switched from the Chillicothe subdivision to the Mendota subdivision, bringing an end to passenger service on the Chillicothe sub between Chicago and Galesburg. Even the old passenger station that used to lie on the Santa Fe line in town was shut down and demolished. Today, Amtrak's Southwest Chief now utilizes the Galesburg Station on the old Burlington route. Speaking of the Burlington route station, we then decided to go over there to check it out. The Galesburg Station was built in 1984 to replace an older and much more beautiful station that was unfortunately razed to the ground. Besides Amtrak, the Galesburg Railroad Museum is also located here at the station. The museum was founded in 1982 and used to be located in the older station, but when that building was razed to the ground in 1984, both Amtrak and the museum were moved into the new station. The pride and joy of the museum is Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy 3006. 3006 is an S4 Class 464 Hudson, built in 1930 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Besides 3006, the museum has many more artifacts and displays inside their building. If you're ever visiting Galesburg, I highly recommend visiting the museum. The people running the place are very nice, and the museum is full of history. The station also makes for a great place to watch Bnsf trains as they enter or exit Galesburg Terminal Yard from the north end. As we were here, I got to see Bnsf 1882 come by as it was switching a train in the yard. Bnsf 1882 is an EMD SD40-2, built in 1979 for the Santa Fe Railway as 5115. Now, if you wish to come visit the museum or the passenger station, they are located at 225 South Seminary Road, Galesburg, Illinois. The museum is open to the public from Monday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. and Sundays from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. After 1882 got back into the yard, we came to the decision to leave town. After all, we were on a road trip to Omaha, Nebraska, and we still had a lot of driving ahead of us. Hopefully someday we'll return back to Galesburg, but for now, we had to leave. Once we were back on the road, we then drove across the state of Iowa, but unfortunately, we didn't see any other trains for the rest of the day. That afternoon, we finally arrived in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, the hotel we are staying at is now what I consider to be the best Hampton hotel ever, the Hampton Inn & Suites, Omaha downtown. The reason why I consider this hotel to be the best one I've ever stayed at is because right next door is the Union Pacific's display track, and sitting on the display track was the very reason why we were out here. Union Pacific 4014, the big boy. Union Pacific 4014 is a 4884 built in 1941 by the Alco Schenectady Works in Schenectady, New York. It was part of the first order of 20 big boys to be built for the Union Pacific Railroad, numbered from 4000 to 4020. In 1944, the UP ordered 5 more big boys to be built, resulting in a total of 25 of them being built. Originally, the Union Pacific Railroad wanted to call their new class of locomotives the Wasatch Class, after the mountain range they were specifically designed to climb over. But when the first 4884 came out of the Schenectady shops, one of the workers climbed up onto the deck of the massive engine and wrote on the smoke box door, "Big Boy," and the name stuck. For 4014, it worked for the Union Pacific Railroad, hauling long freight trains between Cheyenne, Wyoming and Ogden, Utah. Then, on July 21st, 1959, 4014 pulled her last revenue freight train and was retired. The engine was kept by the Union Pacific Railroad until December 7th, 1961, when the UP decided to donate 4014 to the California chapter of Railway and Locomotive Historical Society of Pomona, California. The massive engine was then towed by the Union Pacific to Pomona, California, and once there, it was put on display with many other steam locomotives they had. As time marched on, the society became known as the Rail Giant's Train Museum. Then, in 2012, the Union Pacific Railroad announced that they were looking into reacquiring one of their big boys to operate in their steam program. After looking at all the big boys that were left, it was decided that 4014 was the best candidate for the job, and on July 23, 2013, the Union Pacific and the Society came to an agreement. The Society would transfer ownership of the Giant back to the Union Pacific Railroad, and in return, they got Union Pacific 3105 and EMD SD40-2. Once the agreement was made, they began the process of bringing 4014 back to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where the steam program was based. The engine finally arrived back in Cheyenne, Wyoming on May 8, 2014, and although the engine was in the shops, the work didn't really start on the engine until August of 2016, after they finished working on 844's overhaul. Tucked in behind 4014 was Union Pacific 8167, a GE ES44 AC-H, built in 2014. It was with 4014 to help it with its whistle-stop tour, although it was just smooth sailing for the locomotive, as 4014 was doing most of the work. Behind both locomotives is Union Pacific's fleet of vintage passenger cars, which were being used for this occasion. Soon, the afternoon turned into night, and we came back out here again to get some more shots of 4014, this time at night. Getting back to the history of this magnificent giant, then, on May 1st, 2019, around 9 p.m., for the first time since 1959, 4014 was fired up and moved under its own power and became the world's largest operational steam locomotive. Once testing was done, 4014 then pulled its first excursion train, dubbed the Great Race to Ogden. It was a double-header run with 844 to help celebrate the 150th anniversary of the first transcontinental railroad in the United States, which ran from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Ogden, Utah. Once the Great Race to Ogden was done, the Union Pacific then announced 2 more whistle-stop tours with 4014, and we are here to see it as it pulled the Great Race across the Midwest, which was its first solo trip on the railroad. The day prior and today saw 4014 pull its train from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Omaha, Nebraska. There was a slight chance that this trip wouldn't have happened at all because of flooding in central Nebraska, but 4014 was able to make it through. The engine will stay here on display until the day after tomorrow, when it will continue on its tour to the Twin Cities and Duluth, Minnesota. After Duluth, it will then travel back down to the Twin Cities and then run towards Chicago, Illinois. After some time spent in Chicago, Illinois, the engine will then finish its whistle-stop tour by going back to Omaha, Nebraska, and ultimately Cheyenne, Wyoming, finishing its Great Race across the Midwest. Our plan was to chase this massive engine for the next 3 days from here all the way up to the Twin Cities, as it passed through Boone, Iowa, and Mason City, Iowa. Another thing to note of 4014 is that the tender it's using is actually 3985's tender. 3985 was the other steam star of the program. When the steam team was restoring 4014, the engine was converted to burn oil instead of coal. To make the restoration progress go faster, it was decided to just use 3985's tender instead of restoring and converting 4014's existing tender, since 3985 was already converted to burn oil. As we are looking at the Majestic Giant, I then noticed 8167. It appeared that there was a rave party happening inside the cab. It might have been just a computer glitch that was making the lights go crazy inside the cab. Anyway, after we got our shots of 4014, we then went back up to our hotel room, but not before going to the top floor of the hotel to get one more down angle shot of 4014. Once we got our last shots, we then went to bed. The next day, we spent the entire day exploring Omaha, but I'll save that for another video. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this trip to Omaha, Nebraska. We had a lot of fun exploring Illinois, and especially visiting Galesburg. And as I said in the video, we'll try to get back there someday to visit the trains of Galesburg. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys have a good day. See you later!